Measures training. And just a little bit of a heads up, the Department of Education is putting on this particular webinar. We'll show you some of us that are on this particular call in just a second, but this is our first training that we're doing in conjunction with the Department of Education to help you all understand your GPRA measures. So just so that you can understand some of our goals for today, we're going to do some introductions about who we are and who's here on this particular meeting. We're going to really do our best to help you understand those GPRA measures and really give you some detailed information and about what your particular baseline data is. And then we're going to discuss next steps. This last thing here where we're saying this is your session, it is true, this is your session. Mike is going to be doing a lot of the leading of discussion and explaining along with Lauren and myself, but we really want to make sure the reason that we had this in a meeting format was one, so that we could all see our faces and your faces and get to know each other a little bit more, but also because we want you to feel free to unmute and ask questions as we go along so that you're getting any information that you need about these particular measures and the information that we're going to be giving to you shortly. So just a quick little introduction. I'm Heather Jenkins. I am one of the leads on this particular project for the 21st Century Learning. I work for Demonstrated Success, and we are contracted through the Department of Education. We also have Lauren Mercier here, who is a Demonstrated Success employee, but was working on this project along with Mike Schwartz. The folks that are also on this call that are our DOE representatives are folks that we have Emily Fabian, who is also here, and Kathy Vestal that's here from the Department of Education. So they're on this call to get the same information and to be able to answer any questions that they might be able to answer as well along the way.
Great. So we will just go over a few logistics before we really dive into this information this morning. First and foremost, very happy to have you with us. We know your schedules are busy and they're tight, and we're really grateful that you're able to carve out a couple hours and join us here on the call this morning. Our session is being recorded and will be made available to you so that you can pass on to others as you'd like. You are very much encouraged to participate by turning on your cameras, asking questions throughout the presentation in the chat, or by raising your hand. And Heather and I will be monitoring the chat and looking for raised hands. So we really do welcome that participation. And that really is actually one of the reasons why we are choosing this format, this meeting in Zoom versus a maybe more traditional webinar format where you're not able to speak. So please do feel free to unmute and ask questions or share some thoughts with us. You will be receiving a follow-up email in the next day or two with a link to these slides and any other supplemental information that we might have for you. I did also pop a link to the slides in the chat. So viewing access is on, so you should all be able to see the slides this morning. And your feedback is very important to us. So please do complete our feedback survey at the end of our presentation. We will pop the link in the chat, and we look forward to your feedback so that we can make this program stronger for you.
And just a quick logistical, there isn't a raise the hand in the meeting. So if you could put anything in your chat or just unmute, just let us know.
Thanks.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Lauren. And Kathy and Emily, thank you for letting us, help out with this. I know Kathy and Emily both really felt it was important to try to provide some additional support to school districts with the new GPRA measures. And so, one thing to kind of lead this discussion with is the fact that we anticipate working with Kathy and Emily that we will be able to help you for a while. This isn't just today or tomorrow. I mean, we're hoping that for the next couple of years, and we'll be able to provide support to all of you. So definitely give us guidance on what's working, what's not in terms of our support and our help both today and as we go forward, and help us understand how we can help you best. So we will definitely tailor and want to tailor to your needs. In terms of today's presentation, so we have basically what we're going to do today is, as Heather described a little bit, is we're going to go through the GPRA measures and what are they. We're going to help you get some context if you don't already have it of why these things are even here, these new measurements, and then we'll talk about how New Hampshire has implemented these. And then we'll actually show you some data that you've got access to. We've given you access both on a Google Drive, and you're going to have access through the I4C system to some data about your school districts and your programs, so that you can start looking at some of the baseline data that'll guide this GPRA review. The other thing I want to mention is that not only are we looking for your feedback with the training or with this type of training we're doing, but also with the actual data that we're providing to you. So I'm going to say it a couple of times, I'm sure, throughout this presentation, but as you start looking at the data that's going to become available to you, two things. One is we want your feedback to see if there's any anomalies. If we've this is the department's just kind of put a lot of this in place very quickly. And so if you find any anomalies that we need to raise some issues to make sure the data is being presented correctly and pulled correctly, definitely let us know that. And then if there's other data that you think will be helpful, let us know. We had a great conversation. We had a couple conversations. Jess from Conway had reached out to us with some questions about the data, and she really was able to help us understand some of the things that might be valuable to, I suspect, most of the programs. So as there's other data that might be helpful, please let us know and we'll try to get that to you as well. So GPRA stands for Government Performance Results Act, and I gather it was an act that was developed by Congress, US, the United States Congress, a while back, to help make sure that grants are effectively evaluated, to make sure that the money that the federal government's providing to all states is used in an effective way. The data that we are not only reporting on in the state and going to be used to help kind of hold accountability for the programs in terms of your continued funding in the state, goes all the way to the up to the federal government and is pulled together at a federal level. I don't know if you've shared some of this data in your meetings before, but I'll have a little bit of it to share with you here. So realize that way I think we want to orient this in terms of kind of going on over the next year or 6 months, year, is how can we help you understand the data, and how can we help make sure the data paints the best picture possible for the hard work and good stuff that's going on in many of the programs. So we'll be looking to your feedback to help make that happen. They don't plan on changing these for several years, so these measures, it sounds like, are going to be in place for a little bit. I pulled this from a presentation that the federal government had put together, that Emily and I think Emily or Kathy might have shared with us. That this was actually back from 2018-19. But I just want to give you an idea of the fact that the data that you're putting in here at the local level, saying I served 21 kids in second grade this year, that all rolls up into information that is used again to help make sure that this federal funding continues on for schools and all across the country. So this was some information that I pulled out from that report. 1,367,000 attendees during that year in the state, or across the country. The fact that those programs exist in different types of venues, mostly public schools, which I think is the case in New Hampshire as well. A couple, we've got some community-based organizations, again, which is kind of the second leading method at the federal level as well. There are a variety of different types of paid staff, and I thought this might be interesting. Again, you have access to these handouts. Again, as I think is probably the case here, most of them are school day teachers, but there are also many non-teaching school staff. That's kind of the second leading area. So it just gives you an indication of kind of what is the makeup across the country of the different staffing for your different programs. There is a breakup of the volunteer staff, which was interesting too to me. A large number of community members, but it also gives you an idea of the volume of school staff. One thing actually I think I noticed is it says 31,000 volunteers, and I cut it off, but it had the wrong number of paid staff because it also said 31,000. But it's a sizable number of volunteer staff that are working in many of the centers around the state, around the country as well. they report. So again, this information that we're collecting in terms of the improvement in students, both in English and math, that again is rolled up at the national level. And so it's, the data that we're doing here is going to help pull together the data nationally, federally, to be able to continue to justify the program going forward. So again, it's important to understand that the information we're using is doesn't just stop here. It continues on and is reported at the federal level. Homework improvements. So some of the stuff has come from some of the surveys or the teacher surveys in the past. We may touch on it at the very end of this presentation, but we are in the process of helping the department review the surveys as well. So hopefully this year, some of the surveys will be a little reduced in some of their length to make it a little bit easier for your folks to complete them, but realize that survey data, much of that survey data is used and reported at the federal level. This slide is showing you the 5 measures that many of you are very aware of. Some of you are becoming aware of. These are the measures that were defined as part of the US Department of Education and federal GPRA program. These are not anything that the states can change. These are the requirements, and that's why the measures that we'll be talking, how we drive down more deeply in terms of the data we're collecting, it's to meet these requirements. So every state, every program in the country has to report on academic achievement. They have to report on grade point average. They have to report on school attendance. They have to report on student behavior, and they have to report on engagement and learning. So these aren't, anything we got options about, but what we can do is help define exactly how we're collecting that data, help make it easier for you to look at that data and understand it. That's part of what we're starting to do today. So I'm going to talk through each one of these fairly quickly, but again, I just want to make sure everybody's kind of in a level playing field and at least we all are aware of what these 5 measures are. So academic achievement, and what I'm going to talk about first here is, again, these are the federal definitions. So this is not something, again, that we had choice over, but this is what the federal government requires. So from an academic achievement perspective, they require a reporting of students in grades 4 through 8, and it's for both school year and summer. It has to include language arts, and there's one for math as well. So this is the first measure that we'll be talking about. And again, this is the way it's defined for the federal government. There is one also around academic achievement that looks at grades 7 through 8, and actually grade 9 as well. We're including as and 10 through 12 that looks at GPA. We don't collect GPA for grades 7 and 8, as well as 9. We're not going to be able to do it because you have to show growth. And we'll talk more about that in a little while. But realize that, again, this is the second measure from the federal government, something we have to do, and we'll describe more how we're going to do that. School day attendance. So school day attendance is the third measure. So again, the federal government said you have to collect school day attendance for grades 1 through 12. Then you want to focus on making sure students are there at least 90% of the year. And we'll talk about how that data is collected. It's already collected, so you don't have to do anything to collect it, but we want you to understand where it comes from and how you can look at it. The fourth one is the percentage, again, looking at grades 1 through 12 of suspensions. We actually in New Hampshire collect both in-school and out-of-school suspensions, and we're going to combine those 2 factors. Again, we'll talk about some of the intricacies of this. Knowing this is, we've gone through the pandemic, your suspension data is going to look very different than it might normally. So we'll talk about that coming up too. But this was the fourth behavior that, or the fourth measure that every state has to collect. And the last one's around student engagement. Again, this is only focused on grades 1 through 5, not again, but this one is only focused on grades 1 through 5. This is the measurement that most states are going to collect through their teacher surveys. In our case, we'll be doing it in New Hampshire as part of the CAN collection. But this is also the 5th measure. Okay, and now just this slide summarizes it. And again, Lauren put in the chat access to this, so you've got access. This just summarizes the grade level information, so you'll have it, and kind of a quick review of the data. Again, for the first measure, we're going to be looking at both achievement and growth. We only look at it in grades 4 through 8. For grade point average, as I mentioned, it's going to be GPA for grades 10 through 12, teacher survey for grades 7 through 9, and then we talked about I4C and suspension being grades 1 through 12, and teacher survey is 1 through 5 for student engagement. Let me pause for just a quick minute to see if there's any questions, or if anybody has any questions, please just ask right now, or continue on.
I have a question. When it comes to the behaviorals, they're only judging that by in-school and out-of-school suspensions?
That is correct. That is the measure.
Okay.
And, that's what's required. I mean, we certainly could add in some other ones. And, it brings up a good point that some of this, again, I talked earlier, like we want to help be able to present the good work that's being done. So if there's other measures that you think might be helpful that will show, some good accomplishments and successes within your programs, we should talk about that too. So feel free to mention that now or as you go on and over the course of the rest of this year, definitely let us know.
I have a question or sort of a wonder.
Yeah.
We're trying to work on some of the restorative justice to bring down suspensions because we all know they don't really function as we originally thought. So maybe maybe it's something we do within our own program where we see how many students have gone through the restorative justice process.
So, yeah, I mean, I think again, that brings up this idea of, and we need to figure out a way to talk to Emily, to talk to you and Kathy about how we can collect some of the activities that folks are doing and maybe that are measurable to demonstrate progress towards any of these things. So for example, for student behavior, we could let districts take an activity like restorative justice and indicate what percentage of your students have gone through that. So we should talk about that. I mean, again, that wouldn't be the measure that's used that we have to report on for the federal government, but it certainly could be evidence that the work is being done towards that effort. Thank you for those thoughts. Okay, the next few slides, we're going to talk through these 5 measures and how New Hampshire is implementing them. And this is hopefully just to give you a little bit more background on where this data comes from, where it's going to be coming from, as well as some information that we're going to be, how we're going to be helping you in some of these areas as well. And again, keep asking questions or giving feedback. So for the achievement data, the source of that data, again, because we're talking about grades 4 through 8, is the NHSAS, New Hampshire State Assessment System. And so for those of you who don't know, every student in New Hampshire grades 3 through 8 takes both a math and an ELA assessment. The window for that actually just opened a week or so ago. So they'll take it anytime between now, basically, and probably the second week of June. Schools are not required to take it at any given date between now and then. But actually, most schools are encouraged to take it closer to mid-May or late May, just to, I think, enable students to have completed a little bit more academic instruction. So every student by middle June will have taken the NHSAS. Every student who takes the test gets a score anywhere from 1 to 4. So most, as just like in GPA, 4 is good, 1 is not as good. Same thing with this. The results of the NHSAS. 1 means that you're struggling, 4 means you're doing very well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. The metric is and if you look at kind of the improvement goals here, there are two indicators we're going to use based on the NHSAS assessment. One is a change in achievement level. So one goal that was defined, again, this is in part driven by the federal government, is that 20% of your students will move from at least one achievement level up to a higher achievement level. So from a 1 to a 2, from a 2 to a 3, from a 1 to a 4. That probably won't happen, but anyway, improvement from one level to the next. The other thing we're going to be doing is the state of New Hampshire determines what's called the growth percentile, and I'll talk more about it in a couple of slides. But the growth percentile helps us look at any individual student in the state, regardless of whether they're doing really well or whether they've been struggling, and how are they growing, how are they improving compared to similar kids around the state. So it's a chance to look at how somebody's doing compared to kids who have a similar starting point. And I'll talk about that again in a minute. The metric, there are a couple of things to consider. One is that growth factor requires 2 years, both these things require 2 years of data. So you have to look at how a student did at the end of 2021 and how did they do at the end of 2022. And you look again to see if their achievement level changed or if their growth changed. Not all students took the state assessment test last year because of the pandemic, and some schools had some students opt out. So if a student didn't take the test 2 years ago, they're not going to be included in this measure. And so that's one thing to consider. And one of the pieces of the report we'll give you in a little while actually helps you understand what percentage of your students took in your 21st century program took the test 2 years ago or last year. We'll start, that is again, a type of thing that if you have a very small, you've got a lot of students who didn't take the test for some reason, we'll help you identify that so you can explain that as one reason that you might not have been able to achieve this indicator. And then again, I mentioned it earlier, but because it requires 2 years of data, kids are only assessed in grades 3 through 8. This is really only looking at grades 4 through 8. In terms of making that improvement, so a couple of things that we're going to do, I think 1 or 2 of you in the registration for today had talked about the desire to learn about some initiatives that you can do to help focus and make sure that you're targeting the right type of learning, right type of math or English language arts learning in your program. We're not going to be really hitting on the content today, but coming up, I think in about 2 weeks, Heather and Lauren are going to be leading a webinar on looking at the NHSAS assessment results and helping you figure out exactly what to focus on. For example, you may find in your NHSAS results that over the past 3 years, your district consistently has trouble with students in terms of understanding their fractions or understanding how to, add mixed fractions or whatever the case may be. And so our hope is that you'll take that type of information and make sure that it kind of aligns with what you're already doing. But 2, look for, and we'll help come up with ideas for you. So look for ways that you can take whatever that activity is, whatever that learning goal is, and incorporate that maybe for 4 months or 5 months within your program, so that everything you're doing within the program tries to include this concept. Again, might be something like fractions, geometry, whatever. So it could be you're playing on the softball field and you're helping kids understand that if they get to first base, that's 1/4 of going all the way around the field. So just trying to create activities that you can make part of some things that are fun, to also include whatever the academic goal is that you're trying to help them with.
Mike, can I interrupt for a second? We have a couple of questions, so I thought maybe this might be a good opportunity to come to the chat first, and then Susan, I see your hand is up, so hang tight. We have a question in the chat. If private schools opt to participate in our programs and do not administer the SAS, are they allowed to opt out? What data will be used to measure growth in that case?
It's a good question. It came up last Tuesday as well. Schools. So one thought is that private school, homeschool students, they can be provided a SASID, so they can get a student ID. The other thing is they could take the state assessment test, but if they don't, then they won't be included in this measure, and you will only be looking at the performance of the kids who are, within the public realm. But I think Kathy and Emily, we talked about this on Tuesday. We have to get together and kind of make sure that there's some guidance for all of you, and decide whether the state wants to make a change and say that they may be required.
Sounds good. Thank you. And Susan, you have a question?
Yeah. In the opinion of you guys, are the New Hampshire DOE improvement goals somewhat unrealistic, at least for 1 year to the next?
Oh, you mean like these goals, 20% improve one level and 60%?
Those are very, very lofty goals.
I know that there was some work done when these were first created, looking across the state, and they weren't actually, they were actually achievable. Like, I think that my recollection was something around 19% of kids across the state do actually move up an achievement level each year. So I think that they're probably
but 60% of students above the 50th percentile, show that to any principal and they kind of look at you like you're crazy.
I mean, half the kids in the state will have something above the 50th percentile. So without doing anything, every year, at least half the students in the state will have a growth percentile of 50 or above.
Well, and I understand that, but those are not the students we serve.
Well, I mean, Susan, it's a great point and it's a great question. And I think we will have to see what the data looks like at the end of the year. And by all means, I'm sure the department will, consider adjusting things if it just doesn't make sense. But that's
Okay.
kind of where they started. And we'll have to see what the data tells us. But I think the bigger point is all of this is new. All of this, needs to be kind of reevaluated and analyzed and make sure that it makes sense. I mean, we'll talk about suspensions, a great example. Suspension makes no sense right now.
Right.
So, this one may need to be adjusted too.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for the question. So I'm just talking, I've got a couple more slides on achievement, just again to make sure all of you are kind of on the same page. As I mentioned earlier, every student gets a level 1, 2, 3, or 4. This is an example of 4th grade math. And so in 4th grade math, each student also gets a score on the assessment. They'll get anywhere from a 0 to a 430. I don't think they can actually get a 0, but they'll get something. If they get something less than a 4th, they can get a score anywhere up to 608, I guess, on the 4th grade math test. If they get somewhere below a 430 or below, then they're considered level 1. If they get a 431 to a 459, they're considered level 2. Level 3 is 460 to 491, and then level 4 is 492. So at the end of the assessment, whatever score they have, that's identified what level they're in. And actually, as I'm thinking about this, Susan, to your point, like maybe one of the things the state might decide after this is, let's not look at improving a level. Let's look at, gaining some level of points or something, so maybe there's some other way to look at it from that perspective. But again, we'll start with what we got and see what it looks like. The level 3 and 4 indicate that a student's on track to being college or career ready. And I was actually on a statewide accountability meeting yesterday, and one of the things that came up is the fact that New Hampshire does have a pretty rigorous assessment process, and there are a lot of kids that end up in level 1 or 2. But so a separate question from all of this is that group needs to make sure that they feel good about the assessment, and we should all be if we do, we should all be kind of committed to this concept that yes, New Hampshire, we think it's important for every student to be at least a level 3, because we think that every student should be able to, or not every student, but a large percentage of students should be able to be college and career ready, and they should be able to understand the information that's at each level. But the purpose of the point of the test is to say each year, if kids can be level 3 or 4, then they are on track to learning what they need to be learning in math and ELA for the given subjects to move them to the right direction. Growth percentile, and the next slide will give you an example of it, or maybe it's 2 slides. I mentioned it before. There's different ways to calculate growth percentile. Sometimes states will calculate it to say, did you achieve at least what you grew from 3rd grade to 4th grade, what we thought you needed to learn in that year? And so, if you made it the full amount, then you've reached that growth. That's not the way we do it in New Hampshire. In New Hampshire, it's a percentile that really ranks folks. So it says everybody who performed if everyone who performed like me last year, if I was in 3rd grade last year, for all the people that performed like me last year, how did I do compared to those people this year? And so it doesn't matter where they were in the state. If they were academically were similar to me last year, how did I do this year? And it kind of ranks me. And I'll give you an example. But the average person out of all across the state will be the 50th percentile, and half people will be above and half the people will be below. So this actually kind of walks through an example of that. And the way growth percentile is calculated is definitely more complex than what I'm showing here, but this gives you kind of the basic idea. And it's, the concept is the same. So this example, if we look on this little spreadsheet on the clip on the left, the idea would be we're taking all the kids across the state, and I just put about 20 names here or something to that effect. But think of this being a list of every student in the state, and in this case, who scored in 2020-21 a 430 on the assessment. So this would be everybody in the state who scored last year a 430. Then for each one of those students, so this is student A, student B, student C, what did they score this year? And basically it sorts them. It says, okay, this student scored a 430 last year, and they were the highest score this year. They were the lowest score this year. They got a 519. Here's another student that scored a 430 last year and got a 519 this year. And it ranks them all the way down to where this student was the person who also had a 430 last year, but somehow they were able to they did a lot of good work and they were able to achieve a 554 this year. So it ranks all the kids who started at the same place last year and looks at what they scored this year. The person who had the lowest score this year gets the first percentile. The person who had the highest score this year got the 99th percentile, and just kind of sorts them, from lowest score this year to highest score this year. There would typically be, hundreds of kids for most of these scores across the state. And again, it doesn't really look at one score. It looks at a kind of history of students to determine, who were the similar students from the prior year. But this is the, kind of the concept of it. And so again, half the kids will be in the lower 50th percentile and half the kids will be in the upper 50th percentile. I think the feeling, or, I can hear the argument that says for students who are getting some additional support, then hopefully they will be in the upper 50th percentile. Realize again, you're only looking at similar kids who academically were in a similar place last year. So it does that with everyone who scored a 430. It would do it with everybody who scored a 442. So again, takes everybody who last year scored a 442, ranks them from lowest score this year to highest score this year, gives them, growth percentile 1 down to growth percentile 99, and, does that for every score last year. It ranks everybody this year and gives them a growth percentile. So at this point now, everybody in the state is given a growth percentile that is based on similar peers from the year before. The system then goes in and it says, okay, now I know of all these kids from last year, who are the kids in Wilson? Well, there's this person and this person and this person and this person. And then also Wilson had these, 6 people who scored this last year. So it takes all those people, in the case, 10 people that are highlighted in yellow, it looks at their growth percentiles and it comes up with an average growth percentile for all those students in Wilson. And that's how growth percentile is calculated, kind of, it's a general process. Please feel free to ask any questions. Feel free to look at this. If if you're not sure now and you look at it and you've got questions later, definitely, reach out.
We do actually have a question, Mike, in the chat.
Thanks, Lauren. Sure.
In the GPRA measures, the verbiage is students attending 21st century CCLC programming. Are we looking at the data of all participants or regular attendees?
Thanks for the question. So the federal government this year is requiring all attendees, not just regular, but all students, all participants.
So I'm wondering, I don't know if you have input or we have input, but how are we expected to have any effect on those who aren't regular attendees in our program? I don't have a good answer. But what I can say is a couple of things. One is we can work with the department to make sure that they run the data so that you can look at it for both. So that even if for example, if you reported that your average growth percentile, the number of kids who grew, at least 60%, at least 50% or 60%, I guess. If the number of those students or the percentage of those students was, say it was 30% of your students did that across all your participants, we could help run the data so you could say, well, what was it for just the kids that were regular attendees? So yeah, I think that would be a really important comparison, especially when we're defending ourselves in year 4 and 5 of our grant, to show that we our growth goals.
Yeah, that makes sense. As long as it's better for your regular attendees.
Right. Thank you, Mike.
Lauren or others, you can maybe make a note of that. Appreciate it. What else? Anything else right now? I totally appreciate the questions.
So just a clarification, all attendees are figured into the growth percentile.
Yes.
Yes.
All attendees.
Thank you.
The number of days they attend.
All set.
Okay. Next measure, GPA. So again, the federal requirement, we're breaking this up in New Hampshire into 2 groups, grades 10 through 12 and 7 through 9. And that's again, because we only in New Hampshire collect GPA for grades for high schools. Schools report the cumulative GPA for all students in grades 9 through 12. And
For those of you who aren't aware, there's something called the I4C system, Initiative for School Empowerment Excellence is what it stands for. But the I4C system is a system that all your schools use to submit student level data to the New Hampshire Department of Ed. And so every year, multiple times throughout the year, files are submitted to the department with every student. At the end of the year, a file is submitted for every student for high school students with their GPA. So that's the information that's going to be used. For grades 7 through 9, we are going to be using a teacher survey data. So one of the teacher survey questions will relate to the students' achievement. And I think my next slide will show that in a little more detail. But this again has to look for improvement. So the goal is specifically 60% of students will increase their cumulative GPA, and it's broken down. So if they're in 10th grade, their cumulative GPA has to increase by 0.25. If it's in 11th grade, 0.15, and 10th grade is 0.1. Again, Susan, anticipating your question, I don't know if these are realistic personally, but it's something that we'll have to look at the end of the year. And again, the state may adjust these. I think it's fair to say, if it's just making no sense at all. The other thing that I realized as we were trying to pull this data, working with the department to pull some of this data together for you, is that not all schools use a 4-point GPA system. Most do. I think probably 90% of the 21st century school, your schools do, but there are at least one or two that I know use like 100% scale or some other type of scale. So that's not going to work with the way this was defined. So the department's going to have to kind of think through what we do in those cases. And then, another thing to include is the fact that a student could be very high already. And so, as it stands right now, they think they're going to be excluded from the growth consideration. But again, that might be something that the state wants to revisit. So you're not dinged for somebody who's already doing well. And then some of the things we'll be doing, again, we're going to be reviewing the baseline data with you. We don't have the GPA data quite yet, but we were going to get that for you. And then there's only, I think, 3 programs. There's very few programs that actually have high school students. So for most of you, at least at the high school level, this won't even apply. But for a handful of you, it certainly will. So we'll be getting you that baseline data, and we're going to hopefully be working with you. The plan is to work with you again to help identify some goals that you can work on. This just gives you an example, and this will be the last one where I kind of delve down to this level of detail, but this is just an example showing you, again, how it's going to work. So, if you got X number 4 students here, just in my example, the state's basically going to say this is what their GPA was last year. So, student 1 was in 11th grade with this GPA, student 2 was, or is now in 11th grade, I guess. The student 2 is now in 12th grade, and last year they had a 1.53, et cetera. This is their GPA this year. And so this student who's in 11th grade now was at a 1.23, and now they're at 1.34. And so the difference was 0.11. And I just realized in my example, this is probably wrong because they were actually in 10th grade last year. So I think they only had to grow 0.1. I don't know, I got to figure that one out. But basically, did they meet their growth target? And if so, yes or no. It'll do that for each student. The student was at a 1.86, now they're at a 2.13, so they grew 0.27, so they did make their growth target. So yes. So it'll do that, and it'll do the same thing. Basically, the data will do the same thing for grades 7 through 9. That is going to be a question that's asked from the Cayenne teacher survey, and it'll simply asking the teachers to say, did the student make did they drop in growth? Did they academic growth? Did they have no growth? Did they have moderate or significant? And if they had moderate or significant, those will be counted as making growth. So that'll be coming out in the teacher survey. I didn't talk about it already, but we are going to be helping Kathy and Emily look through all the surveys this year. There should be some information coming out in the next few weeks. But part of the goal is to help simplify the surveys this year, so there's not quite so many questions. We're going to hopefully help a couple of things. One is I know that some of the surveys were given to all schools, even if a school didn't have a program. And so we're going to help make sure it's clear which schools actually have to complete the surveys. That's for the principal surveys. We will also hopefully limit some of the questions in the teacher survey. So the teacher surveys in Cayenne that they have to enter for each student will have less questions. So hopefully it'll be a little bit easier for them to do. And the same thing probably for the youth and the younger and older youth surveys. So we'll hopefully kind of streamline those a little bit. You'll also see that there's going to be a little bit more information about how you can, how your students are, the completion rate, especially for the youth and adult surveys, younger and older youth surveys. Okay, last few GPRA measures, attendance. Again, end of the year, every school submits an I4C, the attendance information and absentee information to know how many days your students were in attendance. This information, again, the next two factors are going to be pretty hard to show improvement or change this year because of the pandemic. The I4C, in terms of how it's calculated, that we get, for example, that the student was absent or in attendance 285 days out of 300 days, so their attendance rate was 95%. We're going to give you some baseline data so you can see what it looked like last year. But as you know, because of virtual education, attendance and especially suspensions were very low last year. This year, it's a little bit reversed for many schools. I was talking to a school yesterday. This is part of what I think the state, and we're going to try to get some clarification and some guidance from the state. But this year, when students were quarantined for 10 days because they couldn't take, they had to quarantine because of exposure, I believe some schools are going to be reporting those students as absent. And so your attendance rates may fall quite a bit this year. So again, we're going to do a couple things. We will help work with the department to make sure there's some guidance so that there's some consistency, hopefully, in terms of how schools are reporting it. And two, we'll work with you to help define or identify reasons that these numbers and these goals may not be achievable this year, or why things look very different. So I'm sure the federal government's going to expect this. This is not unique to New Hampshire, but understand that this is the metric, and that we will kind of help identify why the data looks however it may look. The goals here, again, 60% of students who had an attendance rate below 90% will have at least 90% attendance this year. So, certainly, especially this year going into next year, we want to help you work and identify what students may be having trouble with attendance and help you identify, ways that you might use some social emotional learning or other tools to help reach out to those students and help see if you can improve their attendance for future years. So that is a great goal. I mean, the intent of this is good, and hopefully as we go forward and we get the pandemic, knock on wood, behind us, we'll be able to help you understand which students are struggling with attendance and help you work with those students to hopefully improve their attendance. And if it's not clear, this is attendance in the regular day school. It's not attendance in your program. Suspension, I don't think I'm going to go through quite that level of detail, but same concept. At the end of the year, the data is provided. This again is going to look for at least 20% of your students who were suspended more than 5 days last year have less suspension this year. Again, because of the pandemic, this data is not going to be meaningful from last year, but this year you may find a spike in suspensions, and so for this coming year, 22-23, you might have the opportunity to help work with students to work on some of their behavior stuff. Again, we'll be providing baseline data. We'll be giving you some training and hopefully some support on different tools. And a lot of you do a lot of this stuff I know already. We already talked about the restorative justice, for example. So hopefully we'll also give the opportunity for you to share that with each other, because I'm sure some of you are doing some great things that might be helpful for some of the other programs to learn about. And then student engagement. So again, this is coming straight from the teacher survey. There's going to be a question on the survey, that student engagement. And we'll be taking that data as well and looking at, making sure at least 60% of the students demonstrate a moderate level of engagement. I believe there's at least one principal or a couple of principals on the call today. I know that was one of the things that was recommended, is that we try to get principals more involved, and many thanks to any of the principals that are on the call today. But that is, again, something that I think we will continue to work with you all throughout this year, this coming school year, to try to make sure principals are engaged with understanding, some of these metrics and helping work more closely with you, because obviously a lot of the work needs to happen within the school as well. Okay, so those are the 5 measures. Those are 5 measures that were originally defined by the federal government, and then are now kind of specified in more detail in terms of how we're going to collect the data in New Hampshire. I'm going to turn over to Heather, who's going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so right here on the slide, Mike has a little bit of a graphic of what your actual plans are showing. So right here, he's got some indications. You have the federal defined indicator. So those are those GPRA measures that we have, that Mike just discussed, and are coming down from the federal government. As we scoot over to the right-hand column, you can see those are those New Hampshire state outcomes and the measures that he talked about for the state of New Hampshire and what they're requiring. As you all put your plans together, and when you put your plans in place to be able to get this funding, you are putting the information in that local school plans column. So depending on which GPRA measure, you put in your thoughts of how you are going to meet those measures and sort of the processes that you are going to have in place to be able to meet those outcomes. What we wanted to do right now is have you really start maybe looking back at your plans. We found out on Tuesday that folks have varied degrees of how often they look at their plans, maybe thinking about if any updates need to be made with what you now know about the GPRA measures or any sort of thoughts that you have about your plans. So we wanted to give you a few minutes here to take a peek at your current plans and maybe think about them with the lens of what you've learned now for your GPRA measures. You go, yep. So like we said, maybe about 10 minutes, maybe 5, depending on how much time you need. And some of the questions that we wanted you to think about and what we would ask you to maybe report out on after you take a peek back at your plans is, how often do you look at the plan? Do you share the plan with your site directors or staff? Do you need to revise any of your local action steps? Or what concerns might you have about your current plan right now? So we just want to give you a few minutes to really think about what your plans and what you have in place right now through and think about if there's any changes that need to be made. So I'll just give you a few minutes there. Okay, I think we're going to bring you back now and just maybe get some feedback from you folks regarding your plans. I also, there's been some conversation going in the chat about the 2022 APR. I know that we have Emily and Kathy on the call. Maybe they can clarify. I could be incorrect about the data coming out in October because it looks like you need it and your reports are due by June 30th. So if Kathy or Emily has any other input on that or understanding of that, that would be helpful for folks. And if not, if you don't have it right now, then we'll make sure to get that information to you as soon as we can.
Heather, the data, they haven't given us particular dates for that yet, but it will typically be in the fall. But our programs, we want them to certify, and be looking at that data all the way through the process so they don't get behind. So we internally have dates for that. And those dates will be announced soon. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that, it helps me. So, just what I'm hearing from you say, Kathy, is that this is just like all the data in the department. The schools that submit their end of year data, they have to submit that by like July 15th or something.
Right.
Lots of data that has to be submitted so that the state then has all the data they need so that in early fall, they're able to report all the data to the feds. So, having every one of your student SACIDs correct in Cayenne, or having all your attendance information entered in Cayenne, or having all the student and youth surveys, all that has to be done, ahead of time so that come the fall, we've got all the data that the department needs to report.
Absolutely, because we need time on our end to put, any narratives in there about COVID or numbers or how programs are operating. So we need some time there as well.
Okay. All right. So if we go back to these questions here that we have on our screen, anybody have thoughts? Do you share these plans with your site directors or staff, or is there a way that you get the information about how you're meeting these goals to your staff?
I think we were kind of, at least for us here in Concord, I was waiting for a training because this is very helpful. And I don't want to go in front of my staff trying to explain things in detail and be incorrect. I have met with teachers to explain to them our part of the puzzle with each student. And that is working to a degree. And we have done that with staff, but this will help us be much more specific, which I think will be great.
Great.
One of the things that we talked about on Tuesday was the concept of maybe trying to create a one, or I think Heather said maybe a 2-pager, or Lauren said a 2-pager that summarizes this as well. So we're on the hook to do that. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll have a 1-pager / 2-pager that summarizes some of this that you could use to share with your staff if that's helpful.
I could share a little bit. So I am the site director of a program. So the plans have been shared with me. I do not, I haven't shared them too specifically with my staff. Definitely after this meeting, I will be able to do that. But something with the academic achievements, we run a group called Peaks where we do a pre and post assessment to students who are behind, and then we offer them a tutoring program after school where they it's focused on reading and math, and then they do a post assessment, and it really shows their academic achievement throughout the program.
Great.
That sounds great.
Mhm. Right.
I can go. I'm Jacqueline Roberts, and I work at Ossipee Central School, and I'm a special ed teacher there. But my role in the Schools Out program here at Ossipee is the receptionist. However, I'm taking a course through Granite State for reading and writing specialist, and I needed to develop a 2-year plan for literacy. And we buttoned it into the plan for the Schools Out. So I created a team for the Schools Out. It's the Schools Out literacy team. So the GPRA measures in our plan for Schools Out, the goals, is tied into the plan that I've created. So we have a team of 7 teachers, the site director, myself, the director of the program, and a few other teachers have developed a plan. So we all know now what this plan is, and we'll be using that to meet the goals for the 21st century. We also use the GPRAs. All of the staff for the club leaders use that plan to develop their activity plan. So that's how we are getting that information out.
Great.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Yeah.
That sounds very cool. It'll be interesting to see, like when in the training that Lauren and Heather do in a couple of weeks, where they identify specific activity, specific learning targets. It'll be interesting to see how that matches with what you've put in place.
I can go if that's cool. Forrest Carter, the Seabrook program director. We've had the luxury of actually writing our newest grant this past July. So our GPRA, our structure, kind of like how we do it, we already kind of had to put that legwork into it. So we've got a really good idea of kind of how we're rolling it out. The issues that really, or I should say the challenges that we run into really is obtaining that data, but more at a time sensitive plan. Right now we do have a Google shared drive where educators were going to input their information, but with the kind of like the workload on our educators right now and on our administrators, it's kind of like taking a little bit of a backseat, which I totally get because they are working like dogs right now. What we do for transparency is we actually have created a poster that displays our GPAs, our GPRAs, but we kind of take out the percentages right there because the idea behind that is really optics and making sure there's transparency with other programs that are in the community, and kind of it does a really great job of identifying what's different with the programs that we do as opposed to a typical program maybe that's just run with the recreation department. So for optics, it actually keeps everyone on the same page. It lets parents know what we're going to be looking at, how we're kind of like measuring impact and how we're measuring success with students, but it sets us apart from other programs as well, which is a beautiful thing in terms of gaining support for your program.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
Forrest, if it's not too, if you can do it sometime, I'd love if you could take a screenshot, take a picture or something of that, your goals, and then send it to Heather, Lauren, and I. I'd love to see it.
Absolutely, 100%.
Thank you.
All right, Heather, should we move on?
Sure. Sounds great.
Let's move on. And but by all means, if anybody have other feedback, feel free to chime in. I'm doing this, right?
Yes.
Okay. So we wanted to do a little bit now we're going to jump into looking at some data. And so we wanted to start this. So we've actually put together some data. And I should say one thing right now. We put some data together in a Google Drive and the Google folders, some baseline data for you. if I'm going to say a few things. One, if you just registered for this session today within the past couple of hours, put your email address and your district in the chat session, because you wouldn't have access to the folder, and Heather or Lauren can give you access to the folder. But everyone who's already registered should have access. The second thing is that this data that we're going to be sharing in a few minutes, we've been working with the department. This is the first pass at this. So there are going to be problems. There are going to be problems in the fact that, and we've learned about some of these on Tuesday, that it looks like some of this data may not include all your students, may only include students that you've confirmed from this past summer. I know that there's some reports that we still want to pull some more data, some more information into. So think about this and look at this as a place for you to, we're starting. Know that we're going to be working with the department to continue to add to these reports. Realize that we can make these reports, we can add to these reports for whatever information is helpful for you. So give us some thoughts as you start looking at these reports again today and going forward over the next few months of how we can help add things to here to make it even more helpful. So just, my main caveat is this is a beginning starting point. Give us your feedback so we can continue to make this better. Before we get into the specific reports, and I should also mention that we put these in a Google Drive. They also are going to live in I4C. So for those of you who don't have access to the I4C system, it's something that we probably should get you working with your school district to give you access, because I think you'll want to be able to get into this data, and it'll be updated on an ongoing basis in I4C. The Google folders we won't necessarily be updating. It's really just a starting place for today's session. But before we get into that specific data, we wanted to talk through some data sources just to make sure you're aware that all these data sources exist. And so there's lots of data, not necessarily about your 21st century programs, but about your overall school performance and how your school and district's doing. And you may want to compare some of your own data to your school's data. So I encourage you to use these sites. The NHDOE has their own assessment page. And so on the department's main website is a page that has lots and lots of data about each school and how the students are performing on the math and ELA assessments. So as you're looking at your own results, you can consider and look at how your overall school's doing. And it just dawned on me as I was saying that and kind of hitting, Susan, you're in my mind with this growth stuff. Like maybe one of the things we should be looking at is, the growth of your students compared to the 21st century after school program kids as compared to the growth of the kids within your school. Because as I think about it, if schools have very different median growth percentiles, one school's median growth percentile may be 40, another school's median growth percentile may be 68. And so clearly, if your overall school is struggling, you're not going to be able to improve your students as much as a school who might already be doing well overall within their school's growth. So anyway, I just throw that out there because it popped in my mind. But anyway, that assessment data, that growth data is on the assessment website. There is tons of enrollment data on the DOE's website as well. So how many, look at your student enrollment over time, look at the percentage of students in your school who are on free and reduced lunch, dropout information, a lot of information about your school's data is on the website there. There's something called iPlatform. So if you haven't seen it before, this is basically it's a report card for every school and district in the state. And it shows you lots of information from suspension information to college and career readiness information to assessment and other financial information, cost per pupil. There's lots of information about each school and district in this iPlatform. So these three things are all public systems. There's all, it's not private data, it's all public, it's all aggregate counts of students. I encourage you to look at all that. Then there's three other systems that all require logins. You have to have secure access to them. NHI4C, and we'll be showing you a little bit of that. That's going to have student data specifically about your 21st century students. And then the state assessment test, the primary source for that is the Cambium online reporting system or reporting system. This Cambium is the company that administers the state assessment test. If you don't have access to Cambium, that is something too that you might want to work with your principals or your district to see if you can't get access to Cambium. That lets you go into each individual student in your program and look at exactly what they scored on the state assessment test and how do they do in different areas within the state assessment test. So again, fraction, geometry, et cetera, English, each component of English language as well. So that's something you might want to look at. And then Performance Plus is a tool that schools have to pay for. It's not free. It's subsidized by the state, but that also gives you similar information, not only about the state assessment test, but about local assessments as well. The next slide gives you links to all those. So again, I'll just click on a couple of these just to show you. It's like the assessment data. If you click on this, it brings you to the state assessment page. And these again are Excel or CSV files that have thousands of rows for each for your school, breaks it down by race and gender and other information about how students are performing. These can be overwhelming because there is so much information in them. So again, if you have questions about any of this, feel free to reach out to myself or Lauren or Heather. We are happy to help walk you through any of this. We can do a little webinar if it turns out there's quite a bit of interest in any of these things. So know that that's available. The enrollment data as well. Again, you go to the department's website on that link, and it's got information about student enrollment, about financial data, about free and reduced lunch. A lot of different information here as well. And then the iPlatform, you can actually get to that at the bottom of the DOE's website. There's a link to iPlatform. And this again has a report card for every school in the state, every district. So I encourage you to consider looking at that too. Okay, so sorry about that. I never know how to get back into the slideshow. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about this data that we put specifically for you around your 21st century programs, although some of it actually shows you a comparison between your program and your school. So there are two places that this data currently exists for you to take a look at. And you can start playing with this right now. What we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through this a little bit, and then we'll give you some time to look at the data yourselves and then come back and talk about it right now as part of this session. But there, you should all have a link, and actually it's in this presentation right here. I don't know, Lauren or Heather may put it in the chat session, but this link brings you to a Google Drive that has a folder for every school district. If you go into, you'll only have access to your folder. And again, if you don't have access, let us know in the chat session. We can try to get you access. I'm going to go pick on Concord just as an example. But within that, there's an action step template we'll talk about in a few minutes or a little bit later. But the thing to look at right now is this Google spreadsheet. This Google spreadsheet has several tabs on it at the bottom. And so this is just basic information about your school or your program. In this case, your program. So it shows you the number of students in each grade. There's one for 2022 and one for 2021. This is the information that we'd like your feedback right now. If these numbers look low, it may be because of this issue that we learned about on Tuesday, where maybe it's only showing you your certified students as opposed to all your students. But that's the type of thing that we will get fixed, and it'll be fixed in the I4C system if it's not looking correct now. But there's one that has the enrollment counts, so you want to make sure those look right. Now, part of this effort too is to make sure the department is looking at the right data. So again, as you look through this data, you'll give us feedback, and if it's not right, we'll want to make sure that it either gets corrected on the department side or gets corrected on the KN side, wherever it might not be correct. There's information about achievement. So we actually put in here for each one of your programs, how many students, again, these are your 21st century students, how many of them took the state assessment test, and then there'll be a column for each level. So this is ELA, English Language Arts Achievement Level 1, English Language Arts Achievement Level 2, 3, and 4, and then Math Achievement Level 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so again, what this is showing you is of the 40 students, for example, this school, 9 of them were level 1, 6 of them were level 2, 15 of them were level 3, and 5 of them were level 4. And this is in 2021. So what we'll be looking at this year is, did those students move up a level in terms of their achievement? That's one of the indicators. In the I4C system, it's not there yet, but what will be there very shortly is not just these numbers, which are there, but the list of all the students. So you'll be able to look and say, okay, who are my 9 students that are level 1? and then hopefully do some work with those 9 students. You may, again, some of you may already know this information, but for many of you, hopefully this may be some new information that'll be helpful. And then it tells you the total number of students who are not proficient, so students not proficient in ELA, so 15. And so that 15 is really just level 1, 9 plus level 2, 6. So that 15 number is just summed up here. And the same thing for number of proficient in ELA and the students not proficient in math. So that tab is there. There is one on growth. Now, we don't have, the last time growth data existed because of the pandemic was 2019. So just as kind of a measure and, give you an idea of what it was like, this shows you the growth, the average growth percentile for each one of your schools back in 2019. So again, Abbott Downing had 64 students that actually had a growth percentile in reading. 49 of those students had greater than 50. The percentile, which is 76% of the students, had greater than 50 growth percentile. And as I'm thinking about this, we may also need to show you the percentage greater than 60. If that was I can't remember what the exact indicator was. But so this gives you information about growth. Suspension, so this is last year's suspension. So suspension indicator, again, it looks at the number of students who are suspended. I believe it's more than 5 days. And so we actually broke this down into 6 to 10 and more than 10. You will see, as I suspect for most all of your schools, the number of students suspended in 2021 more than 6 days is probably close to 0. So again, this is something that the state's going to have to explain, and this is something that I'm sure the feds are going to understand. Every state in the country had very low suspensions, I suspect, last year. But that information is available for you, and then attendance as well. So again, the goal is to have students at least 90% in attendance. So this is showing you how many of your kids were in attendance less than 90% of the year. So here there's some good numbers, and not good, but numbers in terms of the fact that there's some area where you can be helping work with students to improve their attendance. Again, on the I4C system, you'll actually see the list of students, so you'll be able to understand which are the students that were struggling with attendance. And then we also included a couple of things that not necessarily are reported, but in talking, we had really good conversations with Jessica Conway, and she kind of gave us some insight into some things that were going to help her with her grant. And so, we're here to help all of you with that type of thing. So reach out to us anytime. But this shows you participation information. So I didn't clarify this well on Tuesday. This is participation in the state assessment test. So, and we should change the title so it says that. But this is what percentage of your students who should have taken the state assessment took the state assessment. And so as an example, in Abbott Downing, 40 kids were there who should have taken the state assessment. 35 of them took the state assessment. 5 of them didn't take the state assessment. Schools really want to shoot for typically 95% is the goal. Last year, there was a significant drop in student participation in the state assessment tests because of the pandemic. Hopefully we expect we'll see these numbers go up this year. But what we did here was help give you an understanding of how did your program students, so these first 4 rows or 5 rows here are all the program students, how did they do, not how did they do it, what was their participation rate compared to the entire school? Just to give you an idea of, are your students taking the state assessment test? And so as an example, in Beaver Meadow, what this is showing us, unless there's a problem with the data, which I don't think there should be, but there were 16 21st century program students who should have taken the state assessment test. All 16 of them did. So 100% of them did, as opposed to the overall school where only 86% of the kids took the state assessment test. So each of you will have your own data. You can look at your own data to get a sense of, are your students participating in the state assessment test? And then the last tab I believe we have for you is around free and reduced. Obviously, not obviously, but we can't show you student level data. But what we can show you is what percentage of your students in the 21st century program are coming from households where they're eligible for free and reduced lunch. And so again, this is an information I think is helpful for some of you as you're thinking about your grants, as you're understanding the population of your own students. And so you can look, for example, that, let me say a good example, if I can find a good example here. Okay, so in Runlet, as an example, 58% of their students that are in the 21st century program, so 99 out of 170 students in Runlet Middle School, were eligible for free and reduced lunch. However, if I look at also the whole school for Runlet, 41% of the population of the whole school is eligible for free and reduced lunch. So what this is telling me, what's telling Concord, is that their participation of students in their after-school program is they've got a stronger, not stronger, but they've got a larger proportion of your students are eligible for free and reduced lunch who are attending the program than the overall school. And I know, like I think Jess was saying in Conway, like that one of their goals is to try to help ensure that parents of students living in households of poverty with eligible free and reduced lunch, that they're trying to reach out and make sure that they feel comfortable and are attending the program if they can and need to. So again, you might use this data to understand if that's one of your goals, of whether that's happening or not. Concord High School, well, no, actually most of these, it looks like, are higher up here than they are down here. So that information is available for you. You should have access to through this Google Drive to it. I'm going to spend a few minutes now showing you I4C, because this is, although we put this data out here for the training right now, really the place you're going to want to access this data going forward meaning in about a week or so, is the I4C system. So I'm going to go ahead and log into this I4C system. Again, the link to this, you're all going to see my secret question here. The link to this is in the Google Drive. I think most of you on this call had access, but I know not all of you did. So you might want to try to get it. But the I4C system now has a new link when you log in that says 21st century program data. So we have moved, the department's moved the data and reports for 21st century to this new page. There is some work that has to be done on this page. So again, this is just a place to start, and we will look for your feedback to hopefully improve it even more. Work with the department to improve it. Again, I'm going to pick on Concord. When you come to this page, what you will see is a reporting year. And so you can look, for example, as if you want to look right now at this baseline data for like things like achievement and suspension, that information is not going to be available for 2022 until the end of the year. But if I switch to 2021, you'll be able to see that information and you could go about the attendance and suspension and achievement for the students last year. The screen then has a list of reports, and so you can click this drop down, and some of these reports you might have been familiar with. They used to be on a different part of I4C. They are now on this 21st century page, and you can select any one of these reports. Like if I want to look at the student enrollment, I click on the student enrollment report. There's a problem with the system that it has to refresh, so it takes a minute before you're ready to click review report. But once it stops spinning, you then click review report, and that'll bring up a report similar to what we were just looking in that spreadsheet. So it brings up a report with here's all your students, and actually lists the students below with their actual grade. So again, these numbers should be your enrollment numbers for last year. If you ran it, you could run this one for 2022 and you would see enrollment numbers for this year. Do let us know if this data doesn't look right. And we are already talking to KN to see if maybe part of the problem is that some of those numbers may only include your confirmed students, certified students. This page also includes, when you first come into it, some charts that we thought might be helpful. So it includes the first one, which is probably the most important, which is a list of students whose SACIDs are wrong in Cayenne, or they're not valid SACIDs. And I know for some of these kids, they may be private school students, so maybe they won't have SACIDs, although as I mentioned earlier, you could request SACIDs for them. But you'll want to make sure that all these students, that if you have students that don't have valid SACIDs in Cayenne, that you get them fixed in Cayenne. Again, there is a report for that. So if you click on this Cayenne invalid SACID or date of birth and you click view report, this will show you the list of those students. We also put the enrollment information right on this first page. The department also put the achievement information. So again, I chose last year, 2021. So it's showing you for each one of your schools, what percentage of your students, what were the total number of students, how many were not, what number were proficient, what number were not proficient in ELA, proficient in math and not proficient. So you can kind of highlight over this and see, 50 of the students were not proficient in broken ground. So hopefully this information will be helpful. And the final piece is, this final piece we're going to be working on again this coming year to make sure it's providing the right information. But this is a new chart that will show you for the student survey, so the youth, older and younger youth survey, what percentage of the surveys have been submitted, or how many have been submitted, how many have been started, how many have been not started. So we're going to really work with you this year to hopefully help make sure you get more of your students completing the survey. But this will be something we're going to be able to go in each day and look to see how many of my students have not started the survey, how many of my students have submitted the survey, et cetera. So hopefully this will be a good tool to help you. And, you know, another thing, I don't think we're doing it right now, but we can work with the department to make sure that those reports that kind of tie to that graph show you the list of students. So you can actually, we'll try to make it so you'll be able to make sure you can see which students are the ones who completed the survey, which are the ones who've started, which are the ones who haven't started. So we'll be working on that this year. So hopefully we can get much better response rates around those youth surveys. Lauren or Heather, is there anything I missed, you think, going through this?
I don't believe so. We've got a few things in the chat that would be good to maybe just circle back on. And, you know, like when we're looking at, one of the questions was specifically for the private school students and the SACIDs, how do they request that? Who do they?
So it depends on the schools, the district. Usually it's, I think, the school secretary or somebody that requests SACIDs. It's done through the I4C system. So in the I4C system, sorry, this page, there's under the, there's a couple of ways you can do it, but within the system, you can request a SACID here, or you can upload a file. There's two different ways to do it. But so typically it's the school. It's either I would go to the I4C coordinator in your school. And again, actually, that's a good point for people who don't have access to I4C yourselves. If you Google I4C NH New Hampshire, that will likely bring you to the right page. But actually, if you do I4C coordinators New Hampshire, that'll actually probably bring you to a list of I4C contacts. So there's a page on the DOE's website that for every school district says who's the I4C coordinator. So I can throw this in the chat as well. But this link will tell you who your I4C coordinator is, and I'd probably start with that person.
Okay. And then I think if folks have specific, like if they're seeing their data and they know that they do not have programming in specific schools that are showing up there, should they contact us, or should we, how does that work? How will that work?
If you send me an email, that'd be the best way to do it. And then over the course of this coming week, I will try to go through any of those emails and work with the DOE to take a look at it. Yeah.
Gotcha.
I know that we did know that there were a couple, KN for some reason had a couple of program ID numbers that were wrong. Like I know in Berlin, there was I think the Brown Elementary School was in KN, but it's closed, and I think all your students now go to Berlin Elementary or something to that effect. And I know that there's just one of their schools. So, but definitely, yeah, send us that information. Email would be best.
Okay.
Mike, just so you know, we talked to Kagan yesterday, and we're sending them a spreadsheet to double check those numbers.
Great. And thanks for saying KN, Kathy. I always want to say Cayenne, but I will now get my mind at KN. Not Cayenne.
And then Beth, if you can ask that question out loud, it might be helpful for Mike to be able to ask that about the I4C to KN.
Sure. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly, and that everyone else does too, I guess. I see a field in I4C that's labeled KN student achievement data. And I just want to make sure, since we have the ability to input that information in KN, though I will say we have not done that because I'm aware that there are better ways for that information to talk to each other. That is now something that will be imported from I4C into KN?
Oh, good question. So I assume you're talking about this KN student achievement report.
Yeah. Yep.
So this is the state assessment test data. And this data is not coming from KN, it's coming from the state. assessment system.
Actually, that's not the one. It was a graph.
This one.
Yep.
This one. Same answer.
Same,
This-
okay.
Same answer. Yes. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay.
Same
And I
answer.
was looking at 2022 data, so it's probably just missing because it doesn't exist yet. So,
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
okay.
But if this data is supposed to be in Can, or there's a place for it in Can, we could get that to them, but you'll have access to it through I4C from the state.
Okay. And then the second thing that I threw up in the chat was just wanted to make sure that you're aware, you mentioned, Mike, working with programs to increase the collection rate for surveys. And I think that the problem that we're running into is the RSA requiring that parents opt in with written permission. That has really hampered our ability to collect a good percentage of surveys, where you'll see as soon as that RSA went into effect, our collection rate went way down.
Okay, that's good news. Good information. Not good news. That's good information.
Yeah.
And Kathy, I don't know. Kathy and I were talking the other day about the fact that that RSA does not require opt-in for academic surveys, and so I don't know.
That's so. It's up to interpretation. What is an academic? It's not objective, right?
Yeah.
And our district attorney, for example, has said, no, you need it. You need written permission.
I mean, Kathy, I don't know, if you've had any conversations yet with the DOE folks, but, if the DOE felt that it was academic, if they could, I'm sure if they could provide some guidance letter that they could share with the programs, then maybe that would help.
Yeah, this is perfect timing because this is coming up with the out of school time career pathway grant, but we did talk to administrators yesterday and it is a local decision, but it needs further discussion, Mike, because it is interpretation. A lot of times.
I mean, typically I would think, again, maybe the department doesn't feel they can play this role, but, if they give some kind of guidance, that might help districts'
Right.
interpretation.
And I just think it's important for 21st century to understand, on their end, that we're not just being lazy or something. We have a real problem here.
No, but I also have the option of when we report up to the 21 APR system to make a notation about that and our participation rate. So we can certainly do that and look at it by district.
Okay, so I think at this point, we wanted to give you a little bit of time. Are you doing this? Am I doing this? Doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think it's just if we want to give you folks a little bit of time to go through your data. And so the slide that's up on our screen is just some questions for you to just kind of keep track of what you're noticing in your data, and any questions that you have, we are here. So please keep asking in the chat, or you're welcome to just unmute and ask the question. And we'll probably give you the same amount of time. What do you think, Mike? Maybe 5-10 minutes? 10 minutes?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
But again, as Lauren said, feel free to just blurt out questions or put them in the chat if you have.
I can see right off the bat in Concord, my 2022 enrollment is way off.
Is it way low?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like,
is it possible that is your summer enrollment counts?
it is possible. Yes.
Okay, because what we heard from someone on Tuesday is that you have to certify your enrollments or something, and that maybe you've already certified your summer enrollments, but you haven't certified your other enrollments yet because you haven't been asked to. And
That's correct.
okay.
That would be correct. So that makes sense, that we're looking at summer enrollment. We don't certify the school year until June.
But you, even though you don't certify them, that data is already in CAN, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. It seems the data that the department's getting from CAN does not including those, it's only including certified students is what we're getting the sense of. So we'll work with them and make sure it's updated. And so once we get these like fixes to the reports, like for example, once that report starts showing you all your students, we'll send an email out to everybody to remind you, let you know, and then you can go back in and take a look at it again. And that will be updating I4C, not the Google Sheets. So if you don't have access to I4C, let us know, and then maybe we can do something special for you. But otherwise, we'll be wanting you to go back and look in I4C.
It looks like a couple others are realizing, it looks like they're, yes, it is probably just some student data from the summer.
And that's going to impact, well, for 2021, hopefully the numbers, and I'm curious if anyone can kind of verify it, but for 2021, I assume that those numbers are right because you would have certified all of them by now. And in that case, that you, at least looking back at 2021, you should see the right counts for your achievement and suspension and stuff for all your students.
Jennifer, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. I'm just curious, in looking at the reports, which is really nice to see that we are able to access, this data that we need through I4C. I wasn't aware. I'm curious if there will be a way for us to easily link the SACIDs or the date of births to the names for our own program records. As far as like student assessments, test scores, suspensions, attendance data. This is just a simple way, to pull it right out. But with only that SACID, we'd have to do some background work in KN or somewhere to match up the SACIDs with the student names. So I'm just curious if that's something that was a thought. I know it needs to be confidential within the system, but just curious.
No, thanks for the question, Jennifer. And actually, everybody should thank you for the question because we'll make that happen. So, and I'm sure it'll make it life so much easier for everybody. So, yes, we can make let me share my screen again. Hold on, I paused it for a minute. So I think if I'm understanding what you're saying, and I think what we would do is when you ran any of these reports, and for example, it brings up the list of all your students here, we will add the name right here, if that's what you're asking. So you'll have the list of, like for this is the enrollment report for each student, you'll have the SACID and their name.
That would be amazing, Mike.
We can do that. It'll all, so for like Emily and Emily, for myself, Emily, Kathy, we won't see the name, but you would see the name. Yeah, we should be able to, I think we can make that happen.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then just because you mentioned these reports were not available to anybody until Tuesday. They just came out Tuesday. So this is all brand new.
And Beth, you said you're seeing a lot of sort of anomalies in your 2021 enrollment. The link to those office hours that you were talking about pushing into on Friday will be in the follow-up email. So if you haven't already signed up for those office hours, or if anybody wants to, I believe our Beth Dion from our office will be sending that out this afternoon. If not, then we'll make sure to get you those the link to the office hours.
Great, thank you.
The other thing I just put in about that, if you can send me an example too, that would be helpful. I know that there's problems, and so, but if you can send me an example, that'll help us kind of track down where the problem is coming from. Also realize, like in the enrollment counts, I'm thinking about, as we're talking about this, I'm thinking myself what we're showing you, and like you will see like if I choose a 21 and I choose the 2021 Cayenne student enrollments. I view this report. Realize there is something called no grade. And so I need to check with the DOE folks, but I don't know what's happening for students who don't have valid SACIDs. They may completely drop off your counts here, or they may be in the no grade count. But I'll have to check on that.
I know for us that it's possible to certify our KN data if a student is recorded in the wrong grade or no grade. So I think it's it's in your settings in KN, one of the required fields that we would have to self-select, that when site coordinators or whoever puts in the enrollment for a student, you have to set your requirements for what fields are required before it will accept the enrollment. Does that make sense?
It does, although these counts too come from the DOE system. So these grades are not coming from the KN grades, they're coming from the grades that are submitted with I4C, which also could be a discrepancy. And that'll be good to know. Like maybe, if we decide we need it, we could create a report that shows you, the grade in I4C and the grade in KN. We don't currently get grade from KN, but we could ask for that. But that's good. That's more good information. Jennifer has her hand up.
Thank you. I just had another question, more for Kathy. When I'm thinking about this, and it may be off a little bit, but I believe we've only certified our summer data to date. And I can't remember what the date is that we would need to certify, for the school year. But we would be looking, so we would need to access this data for our June reporting, I believe. I'm just thinking about it and looking at it. So if that's something, that we need to think about for the end of the year, so that we can access and see more than just summer data for these I4C reports.
Yeah, Jennifer. So our goal is to work with KN, so we pull all the students in KN, regardless of whether they're certified or not. So hopefully the I4C reports will start reflecting. I think it's every week we get a data feed from KN. So last week, whatever all the students you had in KN, regardless of whether you're certified or not, the plan will be that those will all show up in I4C that next week.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Mike.
No worries. And again, like once we've got that fixed with KN, we'll send an email out to all of you. So, go back and look and check those numbers. Go back and look in I4C.
I have a quick question. Looking at the student suspension report, is the suspension data something that we're responsible for inputting into KN? Is that where that's coming from?
No, thank you for the question. Nope, it comes also from I4C. Okay. So just trying to think if I look through if I look through these reports, so the list of SACIDs that comes from KN. So those come over to us, and those will be reported based on what's in KN. The state assessment data, the achievement data, the attendance data, the enrollment data, well, those all this data is coming from I4C. The only thing we get from KN is the list of the SACID themselves. The survey data, well, comes from the department, except for, we don't have it down here, but someplace we're going to give you the teacher survey data, and that'll come from KN. So most all the data, except who the students are, comes from I4C. I guess the KN participation data, let's take a look at that. Actually, I don't know if I've looked at that. Shoot. Yes, actually, so the KN participation data. Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is participation. We have to update this. This is the participation in the state assessment test. So that also comes from the department.
I have a question related to the GPRA outcomes. And this doesn't quite fit in with, well, I mean, it does, but I don't know if this was addressed earlier and I just missed it or not, but in our development, of our local goals to meet these outcomes, we are identifying, at least one standard-based learning target in ELA, math, so on and so forth. The DOE expected outcomes, and Mike, I don't know if you can answer this, and I know Kathy just left the meeting, so if you can't, no worries. But I'm looking at this for the first time. I was under the impression, this whole year that we would be assessing student progress based on the learning target that we assessed in our program, or that we identified in our program. But it looks to me, looking at this, is it will be more general, like you were saying earlier in the meeting, they need to bump up, proficiency level and, be at the next, if they're a 1, they need to be up in a 2. Can you speak to that a little bit, just so that at least I have a better understanding? I'm almost looking at this now thinking, yep, in the end, they need to just do better overall. And we're identifying our own local targets. But that's just like one piece of the puzzle. Does that make sense how I'm explaining it?
It makes total sense. And Emily, I don't know if you want to chime in if you're still on the call, but what you said is right. So the actual state accountability system, we're kind of looking for how the programs are doing, is going to be based on the end goal being those metrics we talked about. 20% of our students are moving up a level, or their percentage of students are growing. The middle column, which was kind of your plan, which might look at your your learning targets, those were for this is my understanding, those were for you to guide your work to hopefully end up showing the achievement that's in the right. And so it's right to focus on your targets. And Heather and Lauren are going to talk about this in a couple of weeks. Like when you're looking at your state assessment results, you can't look at everything in the state assessment. You have to pick 1 or 2 things to work on and hope that those 1 or 2 things will translate into success across the entire process. And that typically happens. Like, we have found that in general, that, again, it may take a couple of years, but that schools that focus, for example, if we want to improve their state assessment results, if they focus on 1 or 2 things each semester, or even across the entire year, like mixed fractions or like geometry measurements, that work will translate into improved proficiency across the entire board for students. And there's been some schools that have shown really significant improvement by doing that.
Okay, thanks. That just changes my whole perspective on things. So I'm glad that I'm just glad to know that. I do have another, and again, I don't know if this question's for you, Mike, or if Emily's on. Just curious about our reporting at the end of the year. Now that I'm looking at this, I was anticipating, like we've done our reports at the end of the year for many, many years, that we would be collecting the data and reporting it out in our annual report. But now I'm wondering if that will just be kind of pre-populated and assessed at the state level, and then we'll, find out later. I'm just curious if there's a process for that, if that's a different process now.
Emily, I think, did you just join the call again?
Yeah, sorry. I actually froze up during what you were just discussing when you mentioned me as well. My computer froze, so I had to get out and get back in. But we are planning to continue to have the annual performance report. So the GPRA measures will help inform that, and then also the statewide evaluation. I know we're still in the process of thinking of other ways too to measure them, but we'll definitely still have the annual performance report, and we're going to be sending that out with a training coming up pretty soon here.
But Emily, go ahead, Beth.
You're probably going to say the same thing, Mike. I was just curious if we would be reporting on the results for the GPRA measures, or if that would be something that is assessed behind the scenes on your end.
I think that I don't really have a full answer for that on how we're going to fully do it. I know that we still need to figure out how we're going to take a look at those in their third year that want to continue their funding to, because you're approved for 3 years of funding, and then there's the other 2 years that you have to meet your measurements to be able to continue to get funding. And we haven't completely fully decided on how we're going to be looking at that data to determine that yet.
Jennifer, so you typically submit a report every year?
Yes, yes. So historically, and because these, GPRA measures are new, historically, we were reporting on our local goals. We had identified our goals, our local program objectives, and we would report the data, the percentages, the progress that we had made in that annual report. I'm just looking at this, and I think Emily kind of explained it, that, they're also looking at how we'll be reporting going forward. And I guess I'm, with these I4C reports, I'm leaning towards just listening to all of this, that we may not actually be required to collect the data at the end to show, 20% of our students improving here, there, or anywhere. It will be assessed in the background, and then we may receive a report from the state saying, yes, you met the mark, or no, you didn't, rather than us assessing and then submitting that.
Yeah, I believe that's how it will be going forward. We're still in the works of all that, but that is really seems like how it's going to be. The annual performance report isn't going to change much. You're going to report again how you're going to be measuring your GPRA measures. And everything else in there was staying the same, besides the sustainability plan will change a little bit. But I do think that it's just going to be us pulling the data on our end, and that's just something we still have to figure out how we're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect that we will have, just like, and I think you're right, Beth, that, Jennifer, I'm sorry, Jennifer, that that the state is going to have to pull the data, because the state needs to make sure it's pulled consistently across all school districts, et cetera. And that suspect that there'll be, just like there's a report here that shows, student achievement, that there'll be one that shows student growth or whatever. And it will have a report that has every one of your students and what their level was last year and what their level was this year, and whether they improved the level or not. And, a summary of what percentage of students grew one level. And that'll be up to your responsibility primarily will be to help make sure that data looks right, that, it's got the right students in it. And if it doesn't, then we'll kind of track back where it might be wrong. But I don't, the thing I'm still missing is whether there's still some type of annual report that you should be submitting that does show all the great work you're doing outside of these numbers. And what's required. And Emily and you and Kathy, I guess we should all talk about it. We need to make sure that everybody knows what the expectations are.
Yeah, that sounds great. And what you explained about that report that can be generated for us to see how the students are meeting those measures, I think that's exactly what we'll use to determine additional funding. But we do need to have a further discussion on how they are going to be able to model the great work that they have been doing.
Thank you for the clarification on both of those ends. And I just, want to add that just finding out today, these I4C reports related to the GPRA measures, this really will simplify things. And if we're able to have, if the KN data in the state I4C, data is all linked up and at some point, at least, almost real time, it will be a nice resource for us to be able to assess throughout the year. So, even if it's being retrieved at the end of the school year by the state to assess each program progress, we could, log in and say, how are we doing in this measure here? How are students going, and where do we need to beef things up a little bit to meet our goals for our program? So I think this is just a really nice way to be able to access this data in one place, rather than what we've been doing, kind of bouncing around from place to place to try to collect it all and get it into one place. So thank you for your work on that.
Okay, well, I know we're bouncing up close to 12, and we don't want to keep you too much longer. Oops. I don't know if, Lauren, do you want to ask this?
Well, I think we've kind of had some discussion and some questions. We do have our office hours tomorrow, which I think we might be busy, which is good. We want to see you. Oh, hang on. There you go. Actually, can you go back one more slide, Mike? There is a template that we created for you in terms of action items. So we know as you're reviewing your plans and then you're looking at your data, we just thought you might want one place to record some of your next steps. So this is embedded for you. You'll have the link. It's open. You're welcome to make a copy of it and use it. And so in terms of some of the upcoming offerings, we have our office hours tomorrow. And then Heather and I will be doing a data dive for the state assessment data on Wednesday, April 4th. You are welcome to reach out to any of us at any time. Our email and contact information is in this presentation. And we are working on surveys. I think Mike and Heather, I think both mentioned the surveys at one point today. So we are working to improve the surveys, streamline the surveys, and yes, with all the stakeholders. All stakeholder surveys will be, I think we're editing all of those. So, and then finally, I have a survey link for you. This is your survey for our presentation. It's going to come to the link right now, and it won't take long to fill out. If you could just send along your feedback, that's how we improve. And we care very much what you think. And again, we do look forward to working with you. So we're happy to hang on another minute or two for questions. And if not, we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, everybody, very much. Thanks, Lauren. And as Lauren mentioned, we may get a lot of questions tomorrow, so we'll answer what we can, and we will extend the office hours to other days if we need to.